In 1942, 3 years before the birth of Allenheads, his father Walter accidentally maimed an elderly man during the blackout. The elderly man, perceiving that the incident had not been accidental, placed a curse on Walter. The curse was non-specific and only powerful insofar as the victim believed in it. Walter Heads was a very superstitious man. Not yet conceived, his son had already had his card marked by the fates. An only child, Alan Heads was born in this house on the final day of World War II. 3 days later, he was saved by his mother from a fire that left the dwelling uninhabitable. The destruction of the house surprised Walter Heads, who up until that time had feared that the curse laid on him had been aimed exclusively at his internal organs, of which he frequently complained, despite reassurances given him by his doctor. Growing up here, Alan soon developed a love of the outdoors and a profound respect for the natural world. His precocious and extensive collection of meticulously labelled mosses won him the prestigious Sopwith Prize at his infant school for 2 consecutive years, a feat that was never equalled. He was also a perpetual winner of the John and William Curry Prize for punctuality, on account of his father's habit of dropping him at the school gates at 7 o'clock every morning on his way to his job as a mole catcher. It was Walter Head's belief that the nocturnal mole would be at his least guarded in the early morning, just before turning in. The school, at whose gates Alan Heads had spent a total of 2,520 hours, closed down in January 1969. On learning of this while at sea, Heads declared to crewmates that he felt he had lost a part of himself. 2 days later, he developed peritonitis. His life was saved by the intervention of the ship's doctor who, though lacking the required equipment, contrived to remove his appendix. Heads kept the appendix and later buried it in the school's former playground, an act that was to foreshadow his later life in ways he could not possibly have foreseen. Heads planted a laurel on top of it to mark the spot. It was at his secondary school, built with funds from the Admiralty, that Heads was to make his most formative friendships, with the ill-starred Nancy Liddell and the brooding Matthew Peart. Alan and Matthew became inseparable, spending long hours exploring the countryside around their village and adding specimens to Heads' new collection, exotic escapees from local gardens. In the meantime, the curse that had been put on his father was taking its toll, as the family found themselves forced out of a succession of houses. This one developed dry rot, the roof of this one was lost in a storm, this one suffered from chronic subsidence. By the time they had moved into this house, the supposed curse had become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Walter Heads forced his family to abandon the cottage simply on the grounds that it didn't feel right. By this time, he was also known as Walter the Organs, on account of his fear that his internal organs were in peril due to the curse. It was sometime during the period immediately afterwards, when the family was living in this boarding house, that Alan Heads had a falling out with Peart, an event that would have disastrous consequences for him in later life. Although it was generally assumed that the cause was a shared admiration for the ill-starred Nancy Liddell, Peart claimed that the dispute had erupted when the boys took it upon themselves to repaint this bench. Peart favoured blue, Heads green. One day Peart would paint the bench blue, the next he would find it with a fresh coat of green paint. He would repaint it blue, only for Heads to make it green again. In honour of the contretemps, the bench has been kept half blue and half green to this day. The sides are currently yellow on account of a villager having some spare paint of that colour left over from the decorating of a nursery. However, former friends of Heads, when approached in the village's public house, have resolutely maintained that Heads had informed them that the spat had arisen from Peart having pushed him into this stream, even though the boy knew he could neither swim nor indeed paddle. Whatever the reason, the two were never seen together again on a fell. Almost nothing is known of Heads from the age of 15, when he left the Admiralty School, to the age of 24, when the ship's doctor saved his life by removing his appendix. However, records show that he joined the Merchant Navy, possibly inspired by this piece of machinery, which his diary entries at the time mistakenly referred to as the big ship's engine, and that he spent 2 summers driving a locomotive on a miniature railway in a Belgian holiday resort. Soon after the episode of the appendix, Alan's father died. In an apparent bid to rid himself of the curse by drinking what he believed to be holy water from this spring, Walter Heads had given himself hemochromatosis, his body absorbing and storing more iron than it could use. Although advised by his doctor to stop drinking from the well, Walter, driven by his pathological fear of the curse, continued to do so and was duly found lying dead in this wood. A post-mortem revealed he had suffered almost simultaneous failure of the liver, heart and pancreas. Returning from his ship to this chapel for the funeral of his father, which he missed by several days, Heads was implored by his mother to carry on the family trade of mole catching. Realising that to deny his mother would be the death of her, but also fearing his own lack of resolve should he ever see the sea again, he vowed not only to become a mole catcher, but also never to leave the valley while his mother lived. Using the money he had saved whilst at sea, Alan and his mother moved into this house, which has since become a holiday let. Using his father's tools, he quickly became adept at catching moles. However, on account of the profound respect for the natural world he learnt as a child, he found he could not bring himself to destroy the creatures. Instead, he transferred them into this large round bucket, partially filled with earth, which Alan called his dirt pot. He then released the moles into small fields that were of no value to their owners and had been abandoned. This apparently harmless practice was to lead to his downfall. Keen to bring a spark of his former life into the village, Heads obtained permission to build a miniature railway to attract tourists and ferry them between the village's cafe and pub. However, he ran out of money for the venture after laying just a few yards of track. He was also prevented by the parish council from chopping down the tree up to which he had somewhat imprudently built the line. The timetable Heads had ambitiously posted for his railway line has long since disappeared. It was beside this timetable that a weeping Heads first felt the consoling embrace of Nancy Liddell, although by this time she had become Nancy Ward. Life seems to have fallen into a lull at this point. Heads continued conveying moles for a living and, in his spare time, amused himself by carving owls from wood and placing them in trees. It was soon after Heads began a new hobby, carving rings of stone for use as garden ornaments, that an event occurred that would change his life irrevocably. Nancy Ward, née Liddell, went missing after leaving her home for what she had declared was a short walk in the fells. When she failed to return, her husband and brother-in-law made a search for her, only curtailing their efforts when night fell. The next day, the police, led by Heads' erstwhile friend Matthew Peart, who had joined the force and risen to the rank of detective inspector, conducted an exhaustive sweep of the countryside to no avail. Eventually, beneath this collapsed dry stone wall, on the edge of a small abandoned field, Peart himself discovered a green chiffon scarf, at that time a fashionable addition to a lady's wardrobe, that Nancy's husband later stated may have belonged to his missing wife. With no sightings of Nancy or any other evidence to suggest what had become of her, Peart formed a theory that a large number of moles had collectively undermined the wall that had then collapsed on the missing woman, thus killing her. He further posited that Alan Heads, the only person in the village with any reason to come to this small abandoned field, had discovered Nancy while redistributing moles and, keen to avoid the blame for indirectly causing her death, had retrieved the body and dumped it somewhere convenient, such as this disused mine working. It has since been closed off. Tipped off by a friend that the police were about to arrest him, Heads fled his home just seconds before the arrival of Peart and a cohort of officers. Ignoring their inevitable orders for him to come quietly, Heads vaulted this stone wall and ran across this field, leaping athletically over a series of walls with the police in hot, but rather slower, pursuit. According to the police account given at the time, Heads crossed the East Allen River by this bridge, then this one, hid briefly in a pipe similar to this one. The original pipe was broken up and used as hardcore in the 1970s. This pipe was placed here in compliance with the terms of Heads' mother's will. He then ran along this woodland path, traversed this pond in a kayak, and headed up to the fells. In the rain and mist, Peart and his officers lost sight of him, much to the former's disgust. Heads quickly found himself the subject of a county-wide search, and in a matter of days became a cause célèbre in the national press, with apparent sightings of the fugitive from Dunbar to Dunstable, accompanied by headlines such as, "Has Mole Man gone to Earth?" Heads, however, was determined to keep his vow not to leave the village while his mother was still alive, and was almost certainly hiding here, in the house he'd lived in as a small boy until a storm had blown the roof off. Seeking greater shelter, he moved, probably under cover of darkness, to this former family home, and eventually to the house that had been abandoned due to dry rot. Here, at night, when the smoke could not be seen, he could build fires in the fireplace to keep himself warm, while the police were busy seeking him everywhere from Dunbar to Dunstable. Although Head's mother went to her grave asserting she had never seen her son again after the day he went missing, it was widely believed that she had somehow found a way of secretly supplying him with food, despite a police watch kept on her home for several months after the disappearance. Police drained or dragged a number of small lakes and reservoirs around the village without result, and even created this model of the area to help with their investigation. However, nothing was ever seen again of either Nancy Ward or Alan Heads, and rumours in the village that the couple had been in league and had faked Nancy's disappearance in order to elope eventually became accepted as fact. The case gathered dust on the shelves of Scotland Yard until 2009, when a local dig searching for a Roman lead mine working accidentally unearthed this tunnel. The archaeologists were astonished to discover at its far end a large modern underground dwelling, complete with bedroom, rudimentary bathroom, and a sitting room adorned with a vast collection of owls carved from wood. A smaller tunnel leading from this room, but now blocked by debris, heads in the direction of Alan's mother's house. Though the passing of the years has seen the name of Nancy Ward disappear almost as completely as the woman herself, Alan Heads has fared somewhat better. The man who waited at the school gates for 3.5 months of his childhood, who preferred green over blue, and who moved moles from one field to another, was the star of the 1976 punk hit Where's Alan Heads?, the subject of the long-running West End drama The Man Who Carved Owls, and is to this day widely used as Cockney rhyming slang for sheds. But Heads has also left his mark on the village of his birth. His habit of releasing large quantities of moles in confined spaces has had a profound effect on the local landscape. Over time, this field has grown an entirely new ridge, while in another, the constant churning of the ground by velvety claws has encouraged a spate of creeping buttercups. And broach the subject with any member of the village in which he was born and raised, and they'll tell you that Alan Heads returns here in disguise every year on the anniversary of the disappearance of Nancy Ward, and stands beneath the owl he placed in the tree outside the pub and weeps. This is why rain is familiarly known in the village as Alan Heads' Tears.
I remember Alan. He used to stand just over there. Aye.
I remember Alan. We were close, but, not that close.
Alan Heads? No, he disappeared before I was even born. Weird.